we don't expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Jan Crawford. North Korea launched an artillery barrage against a South Korean island, killing 2 South Korean Marines and wounding at least 16 others. Joining us to discuss the implications of all this is Bruce Klingner, the former chief of the CIA's Korea branch, who's now a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center. And our Bill Plant sat down with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack earlier to discuss the Senate's passage of the Pigford settlement, which will award billions of dollars in settlements to black farmers and Native Americans. Of course, this ends years of litigation on charges of racial bias and discrimination. But first, we're going to talk to Bruce Klingner with the Heritage Foundation about the artillery barrage within the last, I guess it came overnight. Bruce, this appears to be a pretty dangerous escalation in hostilities between North Korea and South Korea. What do we know now about the South Korean response?
South Korea is going to feel constrained in any kind of military response, very similar to the Cheonan, a South Korean naval vessel that was sunk by a North Korean attack back in March. North Korea would engage in this increasingly provocative behavior. The South Korean President Im Young-bak will be restrained in his response because any kind of even tactical level military response runs the risk of an all-out war.
Well, you said North Korea engaged in kind of this increasingly hostile behavior. Why would the North Koreans do this now?
North Korea is trying to force Washington and South Korea to back away from their current pressure tactics and to abandon the international efforts on imposing sanctions on North Korea for its previous violation of UN resolutions. So they're trying to get the Obama administration, the Im Young-bak administration, to return to the six-party talks, to drop the preconditions, and return to a policy of offering largely unconditional concessions.
Well, I mean, that may be their strategy, but from your perspective, do you think that's going to work? Is that what we might expect now from the Obama administration? I don't think that we have a statement, of extensive statement yet at this point.
No, North Korea's intention is to get the U.S. to abandon its policy, but actually I think what it'll do is only affirm the resolve of both the U.S. and South Korea. It's very unlikely the Obama administration or Im Young-bak administration is going to give in to the provocative behavior. It will instead, I think, continue the preconditions for returning to the six-party talks. It's unlikely we would get an additional UN resolution, but the U.S. is going to say that we need to stand up to this kind of pressure by North Korea.
Well, you know, this does come at kind of a tense time. Obviously, there was this recent discovery of a uranium enrichment facility there. Is this in any way linked to that, and the North Koreans may be trying to do something preemptively?
The revealing of this formerly covert uranium enrichment facility, this attack, the previous attack on the naval ship, really are all designed to raise concern, even fears in Washington that the situation is getting out of control, and therefore the U.S. administration should get back to negotiations to try to lower the tension on the Korean Peninsula. But again, I don't think the Obama administration will respond that way. So,
so bottom line, the North Koreans are trying to, it sounds like, force Washington's hand or the UN's hand on some of this negotiating. But, I mean, you've studied this region for, I guess, much of your career. You were there as an analyst for the CIA. Kind of looking at the arc of this historically, does this come as a surprise to you, or is this kind of more the same, North Koreans kind of reaching out, trying to say, hey, you know, we're here, we're serious, take us seriously, and instill fear that way?
Right. There tends to be a parabola on any crisis of North Korean provocation, and in the past, the U.S. and its allies would usually respond by capitulating to North Korean demands. But when North Korea did all these provocations to the Obama administration, which is reaching out with an open-handed dialogue, it really caused a paradigm shift here in Washington. So there's greater U.S. resolve now than in the past. That will likely lead North Korea to attempt yet another provocation to try to achieve their objectives. So we're in really uncharted waters right now. The situation, even if this does not lead to a military confrontation, the situation is perhaps deteriorating given the leadership succession in North Korea. And what that shows is not only do we need to maintain the two-track policy of pressure and conditional engagement. We really need a third track, which is strengthen U.S. defenses, including a viable missile defense system for ourselves and our allies. Unfortunately, so far, the Obama administration has shown a hostility to that. They've imposed a number of cuts to the missile defense budget, and right now are spending a great deal of their time on a new START treaty rather than focusing on a number of crises around the world.
But let's, before we get into that, let's go back to kind of the secession plan, because obviously that's also part of this. How do you think that factors in with the son now appearing, laying the groundwork there for his son to take over?
Right. It's unclear to what degree the succession is factoring into North Korea's calculus. Actually, these kind of provocations are very consistent with previous North Korean behavior. And so that succession may not be playing a large role in inducing North Korea to do this provocative behavior. That said, there's uncertainty whether the succession will be successful once Kim Jong-il dies. It could lead to instability in North Korea in the future, and that has caused a great deal of concern amongst experts here in Washington, as well as Seoul and Tokyo. So it is a more uncertain time, I think, on the Korean Peninsula, with greater trepidation as to where the situation may end up.
Let me ask you what we know, though. I mean, what would you expect? And again, I mean, you're one of the leading experts on this region. What would you expect his son the kind of leader that you would expect his son to be? Will he just preserve much of what's remained in place? Is this really just a shift in name, but policy would stay the same?
Very much so. There's some hope, I think naively, that because Kim Jong-un, the third son, was educated in Switzerland, that he would be much different from his father, that he would implement economic and political reform, that he would follow a much less belligerent path. I think that is incorrect. He's a product of the system. He's more likely to be reliant on support from the senior leadership around him, who would be very concerned about any kind of lowering of tensions, of any kind of reform which they might fear would implement or initiate regime instability. So Kim Jong-un is likely to continue the provocative, belligerent foreign policy of his father and grandfather. And right now we have perhaps a greater risk of miscalculus, either by North Korea itself or the U.S. and South Korea in responding to this growing list of provocations.
So even though he likes Eric Clapton and, as you said, was educated in Switzerland, it would still be more of the same. He's kind of an interesting character.
Well, very little is known about him, but we do know he's only in his late 20s. He has a very short resume. And so right now they're going to be trying to buff up his credentials and his viability as a leader. We're going to see great homage paid to Kim Jong-un to try to build up support not only amongst the populace but the other members of the senior leadership.
Well, let me just, I guess, kind of finally, looking back and thinking about all the provocations and really the stakes, how high they are. What you're predicting that the United States is really not going to take the course of action that the North Koreans would like, that may have triggered this military barrage in the first place, that they may now do a more provocative act. Can you kind of just play that out? What would that mean? What would they do? I mean, this island was occupied. I mean, what next, and how dangerous is this situation right now today, and then potentially going forward?
Right. The initial responses by the Obama administration to both the unveiling of the uranium enrichment facility and then this artillery attack are to stay the course, to maintain the preconditions for engagement, the sanctions against North Korea. So, but it will face I think a growing chorus of people who are increasingly concerned that North Korea may have a nuclear breakout, that they may now have a parallel path to increasing their arsenal, that the artillery attack reflects greater willingness by North Korea to engage in hostile acts. So the Obama administration will face greater pressure to abandon its policy. It will maintain the course for the near term, and we hope that it will continue that resolve. But by doing so, North Korea will be frustrated. They will look for a return to the failed policies of the past of largely unconditional engagement. So they may try to up the ante again. And right now, that is increasingly dangerous territory that we're entering into. It's I think, more hard to predict where North Korea will go.
All right. Well, thanks very much for taking a look at all this with us and helping us put it all into perspective. It's really disturbing. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, finally, we're going to turn here and take a look at Bill Plant's interview with USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack.
Mr. Secretary, with us.
You bet, Bill.
This case involving black farmers who said they were discriminated against because they couldn't get loans from the federal government has taken a couple of decades to get settled. Why so long?
I can't speak to the first 18 years. The last 2 years we've been working hard to get Congress to approve the appropriation. This was reopened by the 2008 Farm Bill, and we've been focused on making sure that the congressional appropriation, which was a condition of the 2008 Farm Bill, was met. And the Senate passed the bill last week, and we hope the House does very soon, and then we get on to getting the resources out to farmers.
Well, it does have to go back to the House one more time, as we understand it.
That's correct.
And there were some objections in the House, people saying, well, there may be fraud involved in some of these.
Well, we certainly had tried to address that in some of the conditions the Senate put on, but I would point out that in the previous 17,000, 18,000 cases that were adjudicated and determined in the first Pigford case, only 3 cases were found to have at least been marginally questionable. So 3 out of 17,000, 18,000. I think it's a fair indication that there were problems that needed to be addressed, and we are making sure that we want to turn this chapter. In USDA's history, it's not just African American farmers, it's also Hispanic women and Native American farmers, and we're trying to basically resolve many of these cases.
Now, how about the Hispanic women farmers? Are they covered under this, or no, that's separate?
It's a separate type of a case, simply because those cases, the women farmers and the Hispanic farmers, were never certified as a class action, and as a result, they are individual cases, so we have to have a different approach to resolve those cases, and we're working on that.
So you hope it won't take as long?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's not going to. We're going to try to, as I say, turn this page and move on to a more positive chapter in civil rights in the USDA.
This was really a rough go. We had tractor protests by black farmers coming to Washington, and how long do you think it'll take them now to get their settlement once the final vote is taken?
Well, our hope is that we get the adjudicator in place and that we begin processing the paperwork. It is a bit complicated and a bit cumbersome, but it is a way of checking and making sure that we're only paying legitimate claims. The fact is that these folks were discriminated against. Many of them didn't get loans when they were entitled to. Some of them got loans, but they got them very late in the process, so it really didn't do them as much good. And as a result, their yields may not have been as good as they might have otherwise been. So this is a process that has been inflicting consequences for quite some time.
Yeah, and I mean, you said when the measure passed on Friday that it marked a major milestone.
It does. Again, as you pointed out, these cases have been pending for some time, and to give viewers a sense of this, we're talking about tens of thousands of potential cases against the USDA. And this is a chapter we want to close, so we want a more progressive and forward-thinking USDA that doesn't discriminate against anyone.
So what does the USDA do differently today to make sure that there is no discrimination of this kind?
Well, in fact, we have hired an outside consultant to work with us to take a look at the operations in the 16 states that gave rise to most of these claims in order to determine precisely what practices are in place today that might potentially lead to claims in the future. We're going to get a report from that group the latter part of this year, and we'll be implementing those changes next year. So it is both a look back to try to resolve the cases and a look forward to make sure that we don't have claims in the future.
Why do you think this took so long?
I'm not sure. Again, I can't speak to previous administrations. I know this has been a focus for us. When the president hired me, I went to former secretaries and said, what should I be focusing on? They said, you've got to close the civil rights chapter, which we weren't able to do completely. I'm very intent on closing it and starting a new chapter.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for Washington Unplugged. Thanks for watching. Join us again tomorrow at 12:30 on CBSNews.com. And don't forget to join me most Tuesdays with the New York Times' Jess Zeleny and Politico's Kiki Ryan. I'm Jan Crawford. Have a great day.